My neighbor used my driveway for 2 years. So I installed remote control steel posts. The notification on my phone screen was a simple red banner, but it felt like a declaration of war. Motion detected, driveway camera. I was sitting in my office at 8:42 a.m. on a Tuesday, coffee in hand, when the alert popped up. I didn't need to look at the live feed to know what it was. I could feel it in my bones. It was Greg. It was always Greg. I tapped the screen. The video loaded, buffering for a second before snapping into crystal clear 4K resolution. There it was. A massive, gleaming white Cadillac Escalade, so new it still had the paper dealer tags taped to the rear window. It was swinging wide into my driveway, the heavy tires crunching over the edge of my decorative pavers with a casual, practiced arrogance. This wasn't an accident. This was a routine. For 2 years, Greg, the neighbor directly across the street, had treated my driveway like his personal turnaround pad. He lived on a corner lot, but instead of backing out of his own driveway like a normal human being, he preferred to pull straight across the street, drive fully onto my property, and then reverse out to head toward the main road. It saved him maybe 5 seconds. But those 5 seconds were costing me thousands. I watched on the screen as the heavy SUV rolled deeper into my territory. He didn't just dip the nose in. He pulled all the way up, blocking my garage door, his tires grinding the sealant I had just reapplied last summer. I felt the heat rising in my neck, a prickly, suffocating sensation that started at my collarbone and crawled up behind my ears. My vision went a little blurry at the edges. It wasn't just annoyance anymore. It was a cold, calculating rage born of 24 months of disrespect. I flashed back to last week. I was outside inspecting the cracked concrete near the street, damage a contractor told me was caused by repeated stress from heavy vehicles turning sharply. Greg had walked out to get his mail. "Hey, Greg," I had called out, pointing to the spiderweb fractures. "Can you please stop using my driveway to turn around? It's cracking the pavement." Greg had laughed. A dismissive, airy chuckle that made my teeth ache. He waved a hand at me. "It's just concrete, Lucas. Relax. It's meant to be driven on. Besides, it's easier for me." "It's not a public road," I said, my voice tight. "And your son drove over my sprinkler head last Tuesday. It flooded the lawn." "Maybe don't build so close to the street," Greg sneered, turning his back on me. "Buy better sprinklers." That was the moment. That was the snap. He refused to pay. He refused to stop. He thought because he drove a luxury car and lived in the big house on the corner, the rules of physics and property law didn't apply to him. He was wrong. I looked back at the phone screen. The Escalade was now fully in my driveway. Greg was shifting gears. I could see the reverse lights flare white. I opened a second app on my phone. SmartGuard Home Control. My thumb hovered over a large, red button labeled Bollard Deploy. Yesterday, I had spent $3,000 installing a set of heavy-duty, hydraulic steel security bollards. They were buried flush with the asphalt, invisible when retracted. They were rated to stop a truck moving at 30 miles per hour. I placed a warning sign at eye level on the fence post right next to the driveway entrance. Private property. No turnaround. Automated barriers in use. Greg had driven right past it. He hadn't even looked. The Escalade started to roll backward. He was moving fast, aggressive, like he always did. "Relax," I whispered, echoing his words. "It's just steel." I pressed the button. On the screen, the asphalt behind the Escalade seemed to shudder. Two thick, yellow and black striped steel posts rose silently from the ground like pistons. They locked into place with a mechanical clunk that I felt through the phone speakers. They stood 30 inches high. Solid steel. Immovable. Greg didn't see them. His backup camera was probably screaming, or maybe he ignored the sensors because he knew the driveway. He slammed the gas to swing the rear end out onto the street. Crunch. The sound was violent. It wasn't a scrape. It was the sound of a vehicle being stopped dead by an object that refused to compromise. The rear bumper of the Escalade crumpled inward like a soda can. The tailgate shattered, glass raining down onto my driveway. The entire rear end of the heavy SUV jolted upward as the axle slammed against the steel post. The car shuddered and stalled. Silence. Then, the driver's door flew open. Greg stumbled out. He was wearing his work suit. He looked disoriented. He ran to the back of the car. He saw the Bollard. It was embedded deep into the rear fascia of his brand new, $70,000 truck. It hadn't moved a millimeter. Greg looked at the post. He looked at the driveway. Then he looked up at my house, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated fury. He started screaming. I couldn't hear the words clearly through the camera, but the body language was unmistakable. He was kicking the air. He was pointing at my front door. I put my coffee down. I stood up. Showtime, I said. I didn't drive home immediately. I wanted him to marinate. I wanted him to call the police. I wanted the official record to start before I even arrived on the scene. I watched the feed. Greg was on his phone, pacing back and forth, gesturing wildly at the wreckage. A few neighbors had come out. Mrs. Higgins from next door was standing on her porch, hand over her mouth. 5 minutes later, a police cruiser rolled up. I grabbed my keys and drove home. I lived 10 minutes from my office. When I pulled up, the street was a scene. The police lights were flashing. Greg's Escalade was still impaled on the Bollard, blocking my driveway completely. I parked on the street. I walked up the sidewalk calmly, holding my phone. Greg saw me. He charged. "You," he shrieked, spit flying from his mouth. "You psycho. You set a trap." The officer stepped between us. He was a big guy, looked tired. "Sir, step back. Is this your property?" He looked at me. "It is," I said. "I'm Lucas. You did this." Greg yelled, pointing at the Bollard. He raised a metal spike out of the ground while I was backing up. "He destroyed my car. That's assault. That's attempted murder." "Officer," I said, keeping my voice level. "I installed security bollards yesterday to prevent unauthorized vehicles from using my private driveway as a turnaround. I have clear signage posted." I pointed to the sign. "Private driveway, no turnaround." The officer looked at the sign. It was bright yellow. Hard to miss. "He didn't see the sign?" the officer asked Greg. "I didn't look for a sign." Greg shouted. "I've been turning around here for 2 years. It's common practice. He changed the rules without telling me." "It's private property, sir," the officer said. "He doesn't have to tell you anything. You don't have a right to be on his land." "But he raised it on purpose." Greg insisted. "He waited until I was there. That's malicious." "Did you deploy the Bollard remotely?" the officer asked me. "I did," I admitted. "I received a security alert that an unauthorized vehicle was trespassing on my property. I activated my security measures to secure the perimeter. While I was in it." Greg screamed. "You were trespassing," I said. "And you were moving recklessly. If you had been driving at a safe speed for a residential driveway, you would have seen the obstacle in your backup camera. Or you would have stopped when the sensors beeped. Did you ignore the sensors, Greg?" Greg's face turned purple. He knew. He knew he had gunned it. "My car is totaled," he wailed. "It's brand new. I haven't even made the first payment." "That sounds like a you problem," I said. "Officer, arrest him," Greg demanded. He destroyed my property. The officer looked at the wreckage. He looked at the sign. He looked at the bollard. Sir, the officer said to Greg. You entered private property without permission. You ignored a posted warning. And you collided with a stationary object, or a security device, on that property. In the eyes of the law, you are at fault. What? Greg gasped. I'm not arresting him, the officer continued. He has a right to secure his driveway. You, however. I need to see your license and insurance. I'm issuing you a citation for trespassing and failure to maintain control of a vehicle. You're ticketing me. Greg looked like he was about to have a stroke. Yes. And you're going to need a tow truck. A flatbed. You can't roll that thing. Greg slumped against the side of his ruined SUV. The fight drained out of him. He looked at the crumpled metal. He looked at the bollard, standing tall and unscratched. My insurance, he whispered. They'll cover it. They have to. I wouldn't be so sure, I said. I'm going to provide the officer with the security footage showing you ignoring the sign and accelerating aggressively into the barrier. Insurance companies typically deny claims for damage caused during the commission of a crime, like trespassing. Greg stared at me with dead eyes. You ruined me, he said. You ruined my driveway, I replied. I just put up a fence. You ran into it. The tow truck arrived an hour later. It took them 40 minutes to drag the Escalade off the bollard. The sound of metal tearing was gruesome. I lowered the bollard with my phone. It retracted smoothly, disappearing into the ground as if it had never been there. The tow driver whistled. Nice system. Expensive? Worth every penny, I said. Greg's insurance did deny the claim. They cited intentional unauthorized use of private property and reckless operation. The footage I sent them was damning. He had to pay for the repairs out of pocket. $30,000. Plus the remainder of the loan if he totaled it. But the story didn't end there. While the officer was writing the report, another neighbor walked up. It was Mike from down the block. Officer? Mike said. Is that Greg? Yes, the officer said. I'd like to file a report too, Mike said. He backed into my mailbox 3 months ago. Drove off. I have it on camera, but I couldn't get the plate. Now that I see the driver. Then Mrs. Higgins stepped off her porch. He ran over my rose bushes last summer, she piped up. Using my driveway to turn around. He laughed when I asked him to stop. The officer looked at Greg. Sir, it seems you have a habit of using this neighborhood as your personal driving range. Greg put his head in his hands. He had to sell the Escalade for salvage. He couldn't afford the repairs. He bought a used sedan. I saw him driving it yesterday. He pulled up to his house. He slowed down. He looked at my driveway. He didn't turn around. He backed into his own garage. Carefully. My driveway is quiet now. The cracks are still there, but I'm getting them fixed next week. With the money from the small claims settlement I won against Greg for the initial damage to the concrete. The bollards are still there, sleeping beneath the surface. Waiting. I keep the remote on my desk. Some people say I went too far. Some people say I trapped him. But boundaries are only invisible until you hit them. And Greg? He hit the wall hard. So, tell me. Am I the monster for destroying a luxury SUV with a remote control post, or did my neighbor just crash into the consequences of his own entitlement?
If you have made it this far and want to see more videos like this, then kindly subscribe and turn on notifications so you may never miss another story like this.